Hello and welcome to the Power Platform Overview Lunchtime session. I thought it'd be useful to put these sessions together because we get a lot of questions about Power Platform and what it is, what's included, what's in, what's out, how does Power BI fit into it, where do Power Apps sit. So I'm Shailan. I'm going to walk you through for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, an overview of the Power Platform as it stands today. With the recent announcements, yes, there will be changes, but the Power Platform is a set of software tools from Microsoft, and I'm going to just show you what they include. So the Power Platform itself, there are four kind of main components to the Power Platform. And you may have heard about them, and you may actually be using them today. You may be aware of them, and people, may have mentioned a few things, and you would have definitely heard from Microsoft, some of these tools. The first one is around, Power BI. We'll start with Power BI. So Power BI is Microsoft's business intelligence data analytics tool. There are components of Power BI, and Power BI allows you to ingest information, model information, create visuals, create reports, publish those internally and externally, and allow people to look at those visuals. There are two main kind of components of Power BI. There's the desktop engine of Power BI, which really is the report authoring part. And this is where you develop, the report. And that's an application that you can download. It's actually the first time, Microsoft have used, let's say, free, because you can download it. You can download it from powerbi.com. You can install it locally if your organization or your machine allows you to, and ingest data and start visualizing that information. There are lots of things within Power BI. Okay, so we're not going to go deep dive on just Power BI. But once you've done that, you publish those reports to, let's say, a wider audience or within your organization. And if you publish them within your organization, then you'd publish them to what's known as the Power BI service. And for that, yes, there is a license and a consumption license. You can obtain a license via Office 365. You can also procure a license separately just for Power BI. So there are two kind of components to Power BI. Power BI Desktop, Power BI as a service. Okay. Now Power BI was introduced by Microsoft quite a few years ago now. And it actually followed an acquisition of ProClarity. So they acquired a product called ProClarity, and then they built kind of from ground up, using some of those components, but built ground up a tool set called, and it's now known as Power BI. The first actual iterations were part of Microsoft Excel. So they actually embedded some parts within Excel. So things like Power View, Power Query, Power Map. So that's kind of the history and evolution of Power BI. And as we know, Power BI today, there are updates every month. It is the leading data and analytics product in the market. Tableau was leading for a number of years, but it kind of pipped them, and it's overtook them quite a few years ago. And I think, with Power BI is here to stay. You may have seen some recent announcements with Power BI, like chat being included, other things that you can do in terms of AI with Power BI, and integrating Power BI and having things like Power BI embedded. But yeah, Power BI, I would say it is here to stay. It's their business analytics product and tool. Power Apps. So Power Apps is the low code and low cost, I'd say, application development environment, so application development studio. So Power Apps has an engine, and is where you can, there were things before about no code, but that was soon changed to low code, because you do require code, even if it's just a line of FX, Power FX formula. Even if it's just a line, there is code that is required. However, it is kind of rapid in it, in the ability to actually develop Power Apps. We've seen lots of apps on the marketplace now, but to enable Power Apps in your organization, you can actually go to make.powerapps.com, which I'm going to show you, and you can create. There are three main types of application development for Power Apps. There's something known as a Canvas app, which is your tablet or mobile form factor, and they're the kind of the two sizes or resolutions as default, and it will just render according to any device. There's something known as model driven, which are based on templates and forms, and very good at, and rapid in terms of data entry, looking up information. You can combine. And there's something known as portals or pages. So Power Pages, used to be known as Power Portals, are the external facing, because with Power Apps they are internal. Okay, they're internal facing. With Power Pages, they can be external. So you can have guest or authenticated users, and think of those as websites. So that's a bit about kind of Power Apps. Power Automate, to help automate things like business processes. So people, would talk about RPA. So RPA, known as robotic process automation. Now, Microsoft introduced Power Automate. Previously used to be known as Flows, and so, but they will help in assign and create business processes. So typical kind of processes are expense management, procurement. So if you submit something like an expense, maybe run through a business process, you'll send an email, maybe approve it, look up different codes, and then expenses are paid, or through the payment processing departments. Things like holiday requests, they're kind of simple process automations, right? So holiday requests, where you submit a holiday, it goes to different emails, it may go to your line manager, looks up your entitlement, and then book and update calendars. But there are more kind of robotic process automation and more complex business processes as well. Depending on certain scenarios, there may be different conditions. The final part we'll cover off on this slide is Power Virtual Agents. People talk about bots, or so PVA. People may talk about bots, and these are where virtual agents can assist, especially if you're filling something out. If you're filling out an app, or from a website, if you had an external facing app, then virtual agents can definitely assist and can help guide, can help deploy, can help fill out things within there. So virtual agents, I mean, we use as well. And if you've seen, or within organizations, if you'd see, people may be using, organizations may be using components of the Power Platform, you'd probably find they're either using Power Apps for app development, with Power Automate for business process automation. Power BI may be separate, and I'll explain that as well, but Power BI may be separate. And Power Virtual Agents will be to help with the others. Okay, so unless there's a real use case. All of these are kind of underpinned by three main components. One is known as connectors. So whatever you do, if you're creating a Power BI report, if you're creating a Power App, if you're creating Power Automate, you'd connect to something, i.e. connect to data. Now, if you're connecting to data, you'd use one of these connectors. There are actually hundreds of connectors out of the box. So you can actually restrict connectors in terms of use within your organization. So for example, if you allowed people to, or your organization to develop Power Apps or reports, then you may say, well, actually, we're not going to allow you to connect to external, let's say a Dropbox folder. So you can restrict connectors. But in this way, there are hundreds of connectors out of the box. I'll show you a quick kind of screen of that. AI Builder. But sorry, on the connectors part, you can create custom connectors as well. So if you have external applications and you want to create a connector for some kind of API call, then you can create external connectors. AI Builder, in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, building something, so looking at something, scanning, detecting, so things like detection, face detection, you can build something with AI Builder. And Dataverse, from a Microsoft perspective, they would see this as Dataverse kind of underpins all of this, and they would propose to use Dataverse as a data repository, data storage. And so Dataverse, think of Dataverse as a database. It is really a database, but it used to be known as a common data model because there are lots of entities as standard that you could take advantage of. So things like employee information, contact information. So there are tables in Dataverse as standard. Power BI. So we mentioned about Power BI as an application on-premise and in the cloud. You can download the desktop application, publish reports like so to the cloud, and it is actually published to the cloud. So if you want your data set separately, you can have things like on-premise data sets and call that data. But normally you'd create kind of analytics dashboards, and these are known as dashboards, report pages, and share them internally. Power Apps, we talked about model-driven apps, and I've mentioned about these. There are so many kind of data sources and connectors within Power Apps, but the key things with Power Apps are Canvas apps, model-driven apps, and pages. Okay, do a demo in a second as well. Power Automate, in terms of process automation, allowing you to create processes, create so business processes, and you can run through different conditions. So you can say, well, get this information, and depending on the input, then go down a certain route. So that's kind of what Power, workflow, a typical workflow would look like this in terms of a business process. And the final one about virtual agents, which I've mentioned about virtual agents. Now, again, virtual agents will allow you to have things like these chatbots that will appear. Depending on certain scenarios and conditions, go down a condition and a route and respond in this way. AI Builder. So this is a good kind of scenario where you may have like camera detection or some kind of detection, and to detect things so it knows that this is an item and this is another item. You can use it in multiple scenarios. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of a scenario. Because when would you use the Power Platform and why? And what would a typical kind of Power Platform adoption look like? Now, it doesn't mean you have to adopt and use everything. You can use certain components of the Power Platform. And I think that's a key thing, because the Power Platform has components. So for example, if you want to use Power BI, you can use Power BI. You don't have to use Power Apps and Power Automate at the same time. it so happens that if you do, you have a kind of a richer experience. So I'll walk through a scenario. So imagine a typical kind of scenario, lots of different spreadsheets within an organization. And typically, you'd have lots of spreadsheets. They may wish to analyze this information. They may wish to update the information, read from the information. You may have other systems in place as well. So things like databases. So we're talking about structured systems. So the two are kind of semi-structured or unstructured, and then structured systems as well. So finance systems, CRM systems, HR systems, and they may reside on some kind of database somewhere. Then you may have other things in place already. So you may have data lakes, data warehousing, you may have some other repositories of data, and then something as a service. Something as a service in terms of, yes, we're using online applications, we may be using Salesforce, Dynamics, SAP, things like Facebook as well, and SharePoint or OneDrive. So if you have information in anything really, the scenario that kind of we would paint and help with as well, and is, well, you have these multiple different source systems. You can bring them in with the connectors into Dataverse, and you can read and write from Dataverse. Okay, so you can create actual queries to populate Dataverse. Now, from a Microsoft perspective, again, the beauty of having things in a central environment, and it may not be to replace a whole data warehouse, but to have this in a central environment, it means information is there at a similar time, similar stage. It's gone through a process of the transformation to get into Dataverse. And then once it's in there, you can use some of the standard entities within Dataverse. So people would always, commonly ask, well, should we create new tables in Dataverse, or should we look at or use existing tables? Well, if there are existing tables there, this is a whole thing with, from a Microsoft perspective, they wanted to build a platform so people could build on top of that platform. So if there are entities like accounts, employee information, contact information, use the entities. It is a true object-oriented way that Dataverse has been created. The first application, and this is before it was renamed Dataverse, was Dynamic CRM. So when Microsoft actually built Dynamic CRM, they built this platform, created the storage engine, which is that common data service, and then after that they created this common data service, a common data model, built all of the entities in there, built the pages, the front end pages, and the reporting as part of it as well. And this with Dynamic CRM, the actual repository for Dynamic CRM is Dataverse. Yeah, and that was the first application on this platform internally from a Microsoft perspective. Azure Information Protection. We'll quickly cover these. Okay, so Azure Information Protection, or AIP. So AIP is to classify and protect information such as documents. So document classification. Is it internal? Is it external? Is it official? Is it official sensitive? So you can classify documentation and classify things or records within this once it's in Dataverse. Data loss prevention, or DLP. So DLP will allow the use of what you can use in terms of connectors, and you can create DLP, they're known as policies, to say which connectors and which kind of data can be used, or where you can get data from and export data to. So if you had an example, you say, well, from our central system, no, you can't export it to Excel, from this app, then you can prevent things like that with data loss prevention. Active Directory, I don't think I need to explain what, Azure Active Directory, but it's tied in. So if you're looking at, if you develop an application, a Power App, and you log into that Power App application, then it will go through some, security layer using AAD to get the data from Dataverse. And you can have security roles as well. So different kind of security roles. So it is a true kind of role-based approach. The components we talked about, so Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. So in this, you have Dataverse. So when Microsoft talk about having this common data model, and using Dataverse, so you've got source systems coming into Dataverse and going out if required, and then developing Power Apps from Dataverse, developing Power BI, Automate, Power Virtual Agents, using Dataverse as that central area and environment. Just some examples. Okay, so that's the scenario. So with that, I'm going to log in to my Power Apps environment. I'll spend a few minutes now on just overall kind of Power Apps, show you a bit of Power BI. So the first thing to do is, if you want to log into your kind of app or environment, then you go to make.powerapps.com. By going to make.powerapps.com, the people, you be mindful. So when you first log in, there are, if it's the first time, you'll only have one environment, and that single environment, first of all, will be known as a default environment. So in brackets after it will say default. Now the default environment is exactly that. It's a default environment. There are some limitations to the default environment. There are limitations in terms of the size of the default environment. It can't go over a certain size. The backing up, so because it's a default environment, it is required. You can't just back things up and restore things. You can create apps within the default environment. You can create solutions within the default environment. There is a Dataverse within the default environment as well. But the default environment, the key thing is, people who access the default environment will all have the same role, known as a maker. So it means anybody that has access to that default environment can go in and start creating apps. So leave the default environment as a default, create other environments. So I've created one here, a sandbox environment. I'll close that. And within this sandbox environment, on the left-hand side, I'll do a quick navigation. So on the left-hand side, yes, there's home. You can create things like an app. Now, if I go to apps, it will give you or show you a list of apps. Now, I'm going to stress, this is a list of apps. So if you have access to an environment and you log into your Power Apps environment, then you may not see all of the apps, even if you're an admin. And the reason for that is apps may not have been shared with you. They may have been created by somebody else in the organization, but unless they're explicitly shared with you or you're part of a group, you may not see that app in there. So there's, it's up to apps. So it gives you a full list of apps. I can do things like filters on, just if it's my apps or organizational apps. We can search for apps if there are hundreds of apps. There's no real limitation to how many apps you can have. Flows. Flows is Power Automate. So this is where you may have a flow in there. You can create a flow. And there are different kinds of flows you can create. You can create something like a cloud flow, which runs, and it could be automated, or it could be an instant flow. You can create desktop flows, and you can look at flows that have been shared with you. Okay, so that's Power Automate. Tables. This is Dataverse. There's no button on the left-hand side that says actually Dataverse. If you're looking for Dataverse, you won't find it there. They're actually tables. So by going into tables, the first thing, again, be mindful, it will say recommended. So if you look at recommended, these are just the recommended tables. And as you scroll up and down, these are kind of the recent ones that we have used. If you look at all, that's the list of every single table in Dataverse. So if you want to search for one, you can. There are hundreds of tables as standard. So, and bearing in mind, the first app I mentioned is Microsoft Dynamics CRM. That's why it's built around that. And that's why it says the actual name. So this is the friendly name, right, of a table. And it is a table. That's the friendly name. The name itself, the one it uses, is this. So MS DIN, which is like Microsoft Dynamics. That's where it started from. So if we scroll down and find one, you can look at any one of these, like a business unit or business case. By clicking on, one of and on a table, what it will do, let me just go up, search up and go to account. That's a standard table, and there's a type of table if it's managed or if it's a core one. If I click on the account table, that's when it opens it. So it opens up the table. Got it? Yeah. There's some data in there. I've got some data in there. And if I edit, I can edit some records. If I click on columns, like a table, you'd have columns, attributes, fields. Right? These are those fields. So those are fields within Dataverse, within this table. You want to create a new one, just add a new one. If you want to look at one and see the behavior, or look at the behavior of one, you can click on one and look at the behavior. Each one of these needs to be unique. It has to be a unique name, but those are columns or fields within a Dataverse table. Now that's the kind of the breadcrumb bar, right? You go from table, account to columns. I'll quickly show you a new column. So you can give it a name. Best practice, by the way, and a true object-oriented way would be if it was something like a choice, then I would go and create that as a choice and then bring it in here, which means if I need to change it, then I can change it one place and it will change it wherever it's referenced in any table. So if you had options like ABC, then if you reference that in multiple tables, if you added another option in the future, D, it would reflect in all of the tables you've used it in. So give it a name, give it a data type, and Microsoft to try to make it friendly, okay? Because remember, this is supposed to be a low code kind of application development environment. So if you're creating a table, create a table. If you're creating columns, we don't have to say if it's a varchar 50 characters, etc. We can say, is it a text, is it a number, is it a date, and the behavior of it. Right, I won't create a new one. That's tables. That's Dataverse. So remember, this is Dataverse. Solutions are, think of a solution as a package. So if you're creating apps and doing app dev, then you'd maybe create your application, you'd create multiple tables, put them together into a solution. Because what that allows is it allows you to then import a solution, it allows you to export a solution, it allows you to check a solution. But for things like application lifecycle, if you start in development, you package it up as a solution, export the solution, and then you can go into your next environment, so maybe it's test, and then to production, and you can import the solution rather than trying to find every single object. So package it up as a solution. Okay, you can use pipelines to do that and automate the process. Connections, yes, these are connectors. So I mentioned there are hundreds. Click on new connection. So if you wanted to get some data and maybe populate Dataverse or get some data so your Power App can use that data, you can connect to the standard ones. So these are the standard ones. Standard are Power BI, Office, Power Automate, Dataverse, OneDrive. Yes, these are standard ones. There are quite a few standard ones. If you start scrolling down, I think the last count was something like 1100 standard connectors. And so you can also filter, right? So you want to now you can search. So can you connect to SAP? Yes. Can you connect to Dropbox? Yeah. So you can connect by clicking on a connector, click on plus, and then it will ask you for credentials, and then you can connect to that connector, and then you can use the connector within a Power App. Chatbot for creating, virtual agents. So that's your virtual agent part. There's a more button. There's a recent change. So with more, because there were far too many options on the left-hand side. So with more, it'll give you the standard ones, the tables, choices. That's what I was talking about. Choices, connections, data flows is actually query to get data in and out. Click on discover, and that's when you can and you'll see a lot more in here as well. Okay. Right, you can pin those. If you just click on more, you can pin those as well. So apps, creating a new app. Well, how do you start by creating a new app? You can first of all go to New App, Canvas. This is just an overview session. So test 1, 2, 3, create, and then it will open up the canvas for for creating an app. So if you're creating a brand new app, I'll create something really noddy. I won't. I'll just the first thing I'll do is connect to a data set. So on the left hand side, data, add some data or get some data. Now you'll notice when you do that, it starts off with your Dataverse table. So that's what these tables are. You can search any other models you may have and connectors. So if you have created a connection, this is where you see your connectors. So that's how you connect apps. So if I said accounts, what I'm doing there is linking this app to the accounts table in Dataverse. That's what I'm doing there. So if I've got the accounts, if I wanted to look at some data, or if I did a data table preview, link it to Dataverse, link it to my accounts table. There's my brilliant app. Just a list of accounts within the accounts table. And so that's Power Apps now connected directly to Dataverse. Okay, there's a lot more you can do with Power Apps. So this is an engagement survey. This is one of the standard ones, by the way. So to launch a Power App, if I go back, let me go back here. I'll leave that. When I mentioned earlier, you see a list of apps, but not all of them. So if you had an app like this, Employee Engagement Survey, click on it and it'll launch it. Get started, and there's an app that's been created. So quick questions, Employee Engagement Survey, what's your role, blah, 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 and it just goes through this, right? So yes, there's some logic built in now. I can't continue until I select things. So you're filling out an app, and this is, and normally you'd have this on a tablet or a device, and that's what they're laid out as. Okay, that's Power Apps. Flows. There's one here. We can edit a flow. We can take a look at this. So let's go edit. There's a quick flow there. So what this flow is doing is saying, well, when a record is selected, so there's a flow option here. So it says when a record is selected in a default environment in a table called this, then when it's added or modified for this business, for all kind of the scope is a business unit, when it's added, modified, or deleted, when a record in this table, send an email. So we can send an email to individuals here. So I'll send an email and it will find people in your organization. So I'll send an email. I won't do everybody because I don't want to bombard their emails, but I will do those too. And then if we run this, if we have this flow running, because that's what it is, a business process running, the next time I go into that table called AAA test locations and either add, modify, or delete a record, they will receive an email. I think they'll appreciate it. So I'll save this flow. That's flows. Okay. What I was going to mention here is, actually, let me cover off one thing. I did say that you can't see all of the apps, and that's because unless the app has been shared with you, even if you're an administrator, you won't see it on here. To see everything within kind of Power Platform, there is an area here called the Admin Center. Today's lunchtime learning. We're not going to cover everything Admin Center, but I will show you. Now the Admin Center, it's the administration console. So on the left-hand side, I've logged in as me. On the left-hand side, I can see environments. And if I look at environments, I can see the environments. So remember from here, when you did a drop down, there were environments. Now, so when the user's logged in, unless they have access to that environment, they may not see it. So from a security perspective, yes, you can create as many environments as you want for your tenant, but you don't have to share them with everybody. You may have different environments for different business units, for different teams. So when I look here, I can actually see all of them. But if I look at, no, thank you, Microsoft. I'm not going to fill this out right now. So I'll close that. So if I look at environments, I can see a list of environments. If I click on the one that I was on, Clearly Cloudy Sandbox Old, when I click on the environment, it will actually give me more information about the environment. I'm going to run a separate session on environment management and the administration. That'll be a separate one. But just to give you a quick overview here, it first of all tells you your URL, and these are unique. Okay, so it tells you your URL, your organization ID, etc. It shows you if you have auditing enabled, because yes, you can enable auditing within an environment. If you're using Dataverse, because you can actually switch on or not switch it on and not turn on Dataverse, because for some environments, you may say, well, let's use Azure SQL as our repository and link to Azure rather than using Dataverse. So in that way, you may not wish to enable Dataverse for an environment because there is an overhead. Every time you enable Dataverse for an environment, it reserves 1 gig of Dataverse space. The Dataverse space you have for your organization is based on 2 things. One is there's a default allowance that you get for your organization, which is 10 gig of space, plus users multiplied by X megabytes. It's 50 megabytes per user, and that gives you your Dataverse space. Okay, so that's there is an overhead. But going back to the point, I was talking about if you can't see all of the apps within this area, but you wanted to see, well, are there other apps? A good administration tool is to log into environments and click on apps at the bottom, Power Apps. When you click on Power Apps, this will now show you a list of all of the apps. So if you're an administrator, this is how you see all of the apps for an environment. With things like, we're not going to cover this at the moment, but it'll be a separate session on things like the Center of Excellence toolkit. The COE toolkit will allow you in a central environment to look at the last time an app was used. Orphaned apps. So has somebody developed an app and have they now left the organization, and is it kind of just, is there an app within your organization that has not been used, known as orphaned apps, because they could pose a security risk. Which connectors are connected to apps? So you can look at all kinds of things with the Center of Excellence toolkit. And with environments here, you can look at analytics, and I mentioned about Dataverse, so let's quickly look at Dataverse. You can see things like Dataverse being used, how many active users, who's logged into it. There's also things like billing preview, so licenses. You can look at resources and capacity. So if I go to resource capacity, I mentioned about Dataverse has a 10 gig tenant size, first of all, plus depending on how many user licenses you have, you'll have so many, X number of user licenses. Now that works out that for this tenant across all environments, we have a storage capacity for Dataverse of 22.5 gig. It doesn't sound like a lot. It's plenty for this, but it may not sound like a lot. And if you're really talking about large applications with lots of data, that's when you'd consider, because I said that's when you consider, well, is Dataverse the right option, or should we just have a subset of data in Dataverse and use other storage, things like Azure, so Data Lake, Azure SQL, and so that's when you consider those options. Okay, I'm going to go back here though. That was apps. That's how you list apps. Oh, by the way, if you're an administrator and you go back to environments and then look at an environment and you look at apps or flows, you can do the same thing for flows. If you're an administrator, an environment administrator, you can even if the app has not been shared with you, because I am an admin on this, you can share the app with you. So you can actually go click on an app that's developed by somebody else. David, I'll say share. He hasn't shared it with me. So David, I'm going to share this app with me. And by clicking that, because I'm an administrator, I'm going to make myself a co-owner of this app and share. So the next time I go into this environment, yes, great, it's done. Next time I go into this environment, Power Apps, and refresh. If it was that one, whenever I refresh, then that app should appear. Probably has somewhere. And that's how you see an app within the environment there. One thing you haven't seen though so far on the slides, so we've seen 3 of the components of Power Platform. We've seen Power Apps, Power Automate, which flows, and virtual agents, as chatbots. Yes, we've seen connections, the other parts. We've seen connections, we've seen Dataverse, talked a bit about solutions, talked about environments, but you haven't seen Power BI. And that's because, although it's on the slide and it is part of the Power Platform, Power BI is a separate tool set. So Power BI, I mentioned, comes in there are 2 parts of Power BI. So Power BI is not, you won't see it in here. It's this part here, known as Power BI Desktop. And so if you wanted to create a new report using Power BI Desktop, you go to Get Data. You can link it to Dataverse. You can say Dataverse, log in. Yeah, I'll sign in as me. And it'll go back. Connect. So that's Dataverse. I pick one of the environments, like the sandbox environment, because there is a Dataverse for that environment. Yes, it's actually looking at it. But there are other connectors. So where I talked about accounts and, so if I looked at something like account, load the data, I can load that data in. Okay, I'm not going to load the data. I'm going to cancel because I really want to show you this. If you go to Get Data, More, this is where you see a list of all of the connectors. If you click on all from Power BI Desktop, this list of all of the connectors available. Right, so you'll notice Fabric, recent announcements around Fabric, but this is how you can connect to Fabric as a preview from Power BI. Cancel, blank screen. I'm not going to develop a report, not on this one, but I am going to show you. If I go back to here and then click on, okay, to launch into Power BI, by the way, you can do it 2 ways, 2 common ways anyway. You can launch into your Office 365 account, and then you'll see a Power BI icon, or you can just go to powerbi.com and log in that way. So by logging into powerbi.com, select which account, log in, and this is your Power BI environment. So this is Power BI as a service, and then you can look at things like workspaces within Power BI. So these are environments, but not Power Platform environments. These are different areas or folders or workspaces. And I'll just show you a quick report. So something like this. Fly tipping incidents across the UK from 2012 to 2021. How many total incidents were there? There were that many incidents. That's the clearance cost of all incidents. How many single black bag incidents? Trends over time, incident costs, and then area heat map. So if I wanted to share this report in the similar way how you share a Power App, you go to the Power App and say share with a wider audience. You then share a report from here. So I think Norman will appreciate this report. I'll send him a link. There we go. You have access to this fly tipping report. So it is within your organization. And yes, that's a live map and you can start zooming in and all that kind of stuff. So with that, a final quick slide on here. with that very whistle-stop tour of the Power Platform, so remember the 4 key components of the Power Platform, because this was an overview. This is an overview session of Power Platform. The 4 key components of Power Platform. Power BI. Okay, so we've seen that. Developing, and so there's desktop as a service, creating highly interactive visuals, dashboards, and publishing those to your organization. Power Apps for application development, and it is that low code, I say low cost, but low code, low cost application development environment. There is something known as citizen development. So if you wanted to allow people within an organization to say, here's an environment, go and create some apps. So we talked about these different types of apps. Okay. Power Automate. So Power Automate is that business process engine for creating processes, so known as flows, and the virtual agents to help with things like chatbots. Connectors we've seen, AI Builder we've mentioned, and Dataverse we've seen. So this at the moment is overall kind of an overview of the Power Platform. So with that, thank you very much.